The Art of Castlevania Lords of Shadow has artwork from Castlevania Lords of Shadow, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2, and whatever that 3DS game was. It mostly has finalized concept art and inspiration art. Overall, this is an average video game art book. This review will cover the quality of the physical book itself, the content of the book, the aesthetics, and the nostalgia evoked by the book. I'll also look at whether it provides any insight into the development of the games. Let's start with the quality of the physical book. Like many other art books, it's 9 inches by 12 inches. It has 192 pages. The covers and pages are decent. It comes with a dust jacket, but I think the hardcover itself is cooler. The image quality is average, or perhaps a bit better than average. The pages are maybe a bit too glossy, but that's just really a matter of personal preference. So overall, the quality of the physical book is average. Alright, on to the book's contents, starting with the image variety. There are a lot of full-page images, many of which are quite striking. There are some storyboard type sequences that are pretty cool. More than most art books, there's a fair amount of art that shows how they wanted to animate various things, like how a character would attack or perform a special move. There are also a few other random things, like this map from a part of Mirrors of Fate. Though there's some decent variety, a lot of the images in the book are finalized concept art. Is the book well organized? Well, some of this will come down to personal preference, but yes, technically, I would say it does make sense how it's organized, but I do think there are some issues. The human characters come first, then the enemies, and then the locales. I think some of the organization feels a little weird because the 3 games are mixed together. So the book starts with Gabriel and then goes right on into Dracula from the second game, which makes some sense, but it's jumping around in terms of when the game's released and when the art was produced. A few other parts of the organization were kind of weird, like having an entire section on whips and chains, but it's basically an art piece plus 2 pages. I mean, why not have a weapons section? There were plenty of secondary items in the games, but strangely some of them are at the end of the Dracula section, and the rest just aren't in the book at all. I mean, this isn't a huge deal, but it seems like something simple to organize. Some art seems to be in strange places, but it actually makes sense. For example, there's a sketch of an image a few pages away from the finalized image. But I think they organized the images this way because you can lift the pages quickly and compare them in a way that's different than if they're side by side. I thought it was pretty cool. Is there any writing or insight from the artists and developers themselves? Well, there's commentary from the 2 lead developers throughout the book. However, the commentary isn't usually about the art, but rather it's about the games. The intro of the book explains how the Lords of Shadow series came about. Most of the remarks are from David Cox and some are from Enrique Alvarez. I thought it was interesting to see how they managed to convince Konami to reboot a series that had dwindling sales for so long, and how they had to make some decisions like how much they were going to try to please the fans versus how much they were going to try out some new ideas. The author of the book, Martin Robinson, he does most of the writing, but there are a lot of quotes from Cox and Alvarez throughout. Overall, I didn't think the writing really stood out as being particularly good, or bad. Does this book have what you want it to have? Well, all in all, I think there just isn't enough content. It's less than 200 pages spanning 3 games. I mean, I really liked the first Lords of Shadow, and I wish there was a lot more artwork from it. Since the first game sold more copies and generally scored higher with critics, I suspect the average reader would agree with me. I would have liked more art and information about the development of the different monsters. For example, the Lord of the Lycans is shown only in a final portrait and one small sketch, but I imagine there was all sorts of design decisions that were made. And the Butcher, also a memorable boss fight, has only one image. Again, this isn't the end of the world, but it would have been nice to see more art from some of the highlights of the game. I thought the Black Knight was a cool figure from the first game, but he's relegated to the bottom third of one page. And some monsters aren't here at all. For example, I think the spiders in the Lords of Shadow game are very creepy and are probably the best video game spiders to date, but they're nowhere to be seen. And also, the environments in the first game were amazing. And there is some art of them, but not nearly as much as I would have liked. I mean, the book has a lot of great images, but it's organized in a strange way, and a lot of the important art is either missing or underrepresented. Overall, the innards of the book are slightly below average. On to the aesthetics. I liked how a lot of the text is on full page images rather than in traditional caption boxes. I think it's a much more aesthetically pleasing presentation than the average video game art book. There's also a lot of full pages of art, and I think that really enhances the overall aesthetic. And a lot of the full page artwork is pretty cool. As for the quality of the art, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, with some average art and some exceptional art. The stuff from the first game is just great, but from the other games, it's on par with other video game art books. I mean, some of the art content, particularly for Mirrors of Fate, it's a bit bland. They're just pictures of different outfits and stuff like that, but without any substantive commentary. It stands in contrast to the other parts of the book. Well, Mirror of Fate is a 3DS game, and the other two were made for the Xbox 360 and PS3, so I imagine there were different priorities with regard to the artwork. Are there any other aesthetic issues? Well, this is a fairly small issue, but some of the sketches and early concept art have notations, but they're in Spanish. Ideally, that would have been translated into English for the English edition of the art book. Overall, the aesthetics of the book are good, and in general, it's a pleasant experience to look through it. I think I should offer a disclaimer for the nostalgia section that I really loved the first Lords of Shadow. I mean, it's one of my favorite games ever. I didn't even play the 3DS one, and I did not really like at all Lords of Shadow 2. Well, does this book evoke nostalgia for the games? Well, in general, yeah, but that's a two-edged sword for me, and likely many others. The stuff that reminded me of Lords of Shadow is great, but I was also reminded of some of the parts of Lords of Shadow 2 that I didn't like, such as turning into a rat for the stealth sections, the clunky enemy possession sections, the open world aspects of the game, the less interesting enemies, bunch of robots, and the changes in the combat system. I mean, overall, I think this book provides as much nostalgia as any other video game art book. Alright, does the book offer any backstage info about the games? Well, I already mentioned how the introduction shares a lot about this, but there are a few other interesting things, like how Hideo Kojima said that Gabriel needed to look less hard-edged and look a bit more like tragedy consumed him. I'll leave it to Kojima. There was another comment about how Gabriel's relationship to the castle is like the inner turmoil within his own mind. I thought it was an interesting insight that didn't really come across in Lords of Shadow 2. There's another little tidbit about how they asked Ian McKellen to voice Zobek, but he was unavailable and his agent recommended Patrick Stewart. Well, overall, I think this is kind of an average video game art book, but I will say the aesthetics are pretty nice. Well, different people want different things in video game art books, but I hope this review has been helpful in showing you what you can expect from this book. If you have any complaints about this video, please contact my customer support center.